All right, so who's winning the Super Bowl tonight? Eagles? Yep. That's who I believe is going to win the Super Bowl. But we have something more important than the Super Bowl. We have church. So any talks of Super Bowl, let's just save it for the lobby, and I'll give you my step-by-step why the Eagles are going to win the Super Bowl. So there's a greater narrative, there's a greater story. It's God's story, right? And it's bigger than football, right? He's doing something where he's accomplishing a mission in the world today. And the players that he wants to use are not necessarily those in high places, but they're people like you and I in everyday places of the world, right? The places where you live, work, and play. You get to be a player for God's team and his kingdom. That's pretty cool. And it's not just a game, but it's a mission. And what we get to do is when we partake in that is we share the only good news, the only hope that this world has to offer. And so that's why we are committed to reading through God's Word here on Sunday mornings or when you come in. Yes, the focal point of it all is Christ. We can be in the Old Testament and the focal point is Christ. And when we look at even like a passage today, what you'll see is a prophet that's willing to stand alone, that's willing to obey God. But what a foreshadow of Christ. Be willing to stand alone. To willing to be obedient to God when no one else is at your back. And so I just, this passage moved me this week. I'm excited for this passage. And if you're joining us for the first time, we're walking through a series called The Tale of Two Kings, where we're looking at Israel's first two kings within the nation. And so up until this point, Israel's left Egypt. God delivered them out of the oppressive nation, and he's given them judges for 400 years. That's how they've been governed. And now they're saying, hey, we want what everybody else has, Samuel. Everyone else has a king, and so we want that. We don't want Yahweh. Yahweh is our king. God is our king. But we want what everyone else has. And so Samuel points to them. God brings Saul in front of Samuel and says, that's going to be the guy. If you remember Samuel's description, a lot like me, right? Tall, chiseled, handsome, good-looking guy. And he's the king at this point for them. And what we talked about week one was Israel exchanged the king for a king. It was a lesser of kings. And oftentimes we do that with our own lives. We choose lesser things than what God has for us. Because of our flesh, because of our sinful nature, because of things that we say, hey, we believe that this is going to give us more than what God has for us. God had more for Israel than Saul. But as you can remember these last couple weeks, Saul's not a bad person. If you're going to have an earthly king, Saul's not a bad choice, right? Again, he has from the exterior the look. And not only does he have the look, but he's got other qualities of a leader, right? He has humility, right? When Samuel says, hey, you're the guy. You're the guy. So you remember Saul's response? He says, like, who, what, me? Like, how? I'm from a small tribe. I'm a hick town. Certainly there's somebody better than I am. There's humility there.
He's obedient to his father. His father gives him a command. He knows how to respond to leadership. He knows how to respond to authority. A lost art in today's society. But again, when I say this, that Saul is a good first choice, you're going to see clearly he's not a better choice than Yahweh. And what you see last week, because Pastor Justin shared the message last week, that Israel became victory in battle, right? They defeat the Ammonites. And these people are behind this guy. So much so that they literally say, hey, anyone that was iffy on Saul, let's put those people to death. Because this is our guy. We are behind him. We want him above every other thing. And so if anybody's got a problem with him, let's put him to death. Saul says, hey, well, hold up a second. No. We're not killing anybody because I didn't bring victory to Israel. He says, for the Lord has brought victory to the nation of Israel today. Right? So Saul, again, reflects. He's showing humility. He's saying, hey, no, that was God. That wasn't me. And yet, this victory of the battle, as the dust settled, Israel has still put Saul on the pedestal. They still have said, Saul is what we want more than anything. So they place him above God. And that really leads into our passage this morning. Because Samuel, the last judge of Israel, sees how the nation has responded to Saul being king and how they've idolized him. They put him in a place of worship. And Samuel says, hey, I can't be a part of this anymore. And so we'll see Samuel give a farewell speech in our passage this morning. But in doing so, Samuel's going to have to stand alone. Samuel's going to have to stand alone, literally no one else with him. One of my favorite vacations growing up, my favorite spots to go to, was Tennessee. Anybody ever been to Tennessee before? Beautiful, beautiful state. And we always went to Pigeon Forge. And if you're not familiar with Pigeon Forge, it's attractions, it's shows, it's food, it's touristy as it gets. And I had cousins that lived there, and they used to work at this go-kart track that was just called The Track. So the owner was very creative in that way. But the track was known for having the largest wooden go-kart track in Pigeon Forge. And it was called the Wild Woody. And now, not only did they have the Wild Woody, but they had this bungee tower you could jump from. It was about a 100-foot tower, and there were individuals in my family that all remain nameless that got to the top and said, we can't do it, and had to walk their ways back down. I had an uncle say to me that he did not think I could do it. I was like 15 or 16 at the time. And so he offered me a bet of, I believe it was $20. And so I said, I would gladly take your money. And so I go up there, and I'm all harnessed up. And the interesting thing was, if you've ever seen those, right, there's those straight up towers, and then there's that ledge that walks out. Well, I assumed that the ledge that you walked out to was you were here and you jumped. And so I'm up there, and the worker's right here, and there's railing right here. So you don't just go straight off of this tower. What you do is, and I said, okay, so how do I jump off of this thing? And she says, so there's this little ledge off the side of this beam, this tower, that you have to step onto and stand onto. And you're alone. You are now no longer connected to this tower. And so I'm standing on this beam is pretty much just big enough for your feet to stand on. And I'm like, I would much rather do it off of this if that's possible. Like, I felt alone. Like, I'm standing alone on this thing. And then my uncle's down there waving money at me. And 100 feet is a lot different when you're looking down at it. And so I'm like petrified. My legs are shaking. And so this is what I just did. You hold on to this, like it seems to be a punching bag kind of thing. And I just squeezed it. And I got low like this. And I just rolled off. Just moved myself forward. And it was one of the most scary, terrifying, heart-racing things in the world. Because literally when you bungee all the way down, by the time you go all the way back up, I probably could have grabbed the ledge again. I mean, and so you're constantly doing it. And so I say all of that because you have to step off and you have to stand alone. You got to do it alone, not somebody you're doing it with. And sometimes that's what the Christian life is. It's standing alone. It's standing at times in places where you're scared, where you're fearful, where it's not fun. And it can be difficult, and it can be frightening, and it can be all those things. And you could so badly just say, I wish I was over here with the other people. But sometimes God calls you to stand alone in obedience to Him. And it's not about the crowds, and it's not about having everybody agree with you. And yet, the result will always be greater than rebelling against God. Standing alone with God is far greater than being loved by a massive sinful rebellion. Right? You might watch the news today. You might see, the way that the culture is going, and you can start. I mean, I don't know about you, but I feel like at times when you watch social media or you watch the mainstream media, you could really start looking at a lot of it and think, hey, we're becoming more and more of outsiders, right? Where hey, the general population doesn't get is not in alignment with biblical principle. And the question is, are you willing to stand alone? Hey, maybe the bulk of your workplace, maybe the people that you work with every single day don't share this worldview. They don't see the value in living what the Bible has laid out for us to live. And the question is, are you going to be willing to stand alone if it means standing with God? Because when you stand with God, you're never outnumbered. Right? You're never going to be the minority in that position. Because God has all power, all authority. And so the culture, I'm taking God over the culture any day of the week. You could start feeling like, hey, we're becoming lesser than. And it's like, hey, read the end of the book if you need that reminder of who wins. Right? God is going to experience victory, and you're going to want to be standing with him because you're never standing alone when you're standing in the will of God. If you have your Bibles, turn to 1 Samuel chapter 12. I'm going to spend a lot of time on verse 2, and you're going to think, Tyler, oh my goodness, there's like 20-some verses in chapter 12. Don't worry, we're spending our time in the first 5 verses, but verse 2 is going to give us a lot of detail. And Samuel said to all Israel, behold, I have obeyed your voice in all that you have said to me, and have made a king over you. And now, behold, the king walks before you, and I am old and gray. And behold, my sons are with you. I have walked before you from my youth until this day. So essentially, in essence, Samuel begins his farewell speech, and he says, well, let's not get things twisted. This whole shift from judge to king thing, that wasn't my idea. That wasn't even God's idea. That's what you people wanted. And God literally told me, hey, give them what they want, but give them the fine print. And he's like, so I made it crystal clear for you that what you were trading and what you were getting. And so now that this is coming on, and you're worshiping Saul as your king, let it be remembered that this was your idea. That this is what you people wanted. In verse 2, Samuel says, and look what you have. He says, you have everything you ever wished for. The king walks among you. Your wildest dream came true, Israel. And the old way of doing things are on the way out. Samuel says, I'm old and gray. Right? When in chapter 8, when Israel's petitioning for their king, they say, hey, you're a judge, but look at your kids. Look at how wayward they've gone. Look, the words that are used are that they perverted justice. And so give us a king. They came up with an excuse of why they want a king. And you just say, hey, you know what? Samuel, you're old. Your kids that are following you, that they're not good people. So give us a king. And Samuel's like, okay, yeah, I am old and gray. But what he's going to get to is, but what have I done wrong? What have I done wrong? Call me out. But yeah, hey, I'm old and gray, and now, catch this. This is huge, and this is where we're going to spend a ton of our time this morning. Samuel says, and behold, my sons are with you. You know what that means? That when Israel came and they said, hey, your sons, these judges that are under you, they pervert justice, they take bribes, they do all of these things. You know what Samuel did? He fired them. Because when he says, my sons are among you, you know what he means? They're not up on the podium with me. They're not up in leadership with me. They're among you all now. I got to imagine that would have been difficult. That would have been hard. For any parents in the room, thinking about your kids. How would you feel about firing them? Especially in a public arena. These people are working in the public. Samuel is a figure in Israel. And everything's not great at home. And sons, I love you, but I love God more. and you can't be leading in this capacity. I imagine that'd be difficult. But this lesson that Samuel's demonstrating, if we understand the family that he comes from, it's not a new idea. It's not a new idea. And so when Samuel says, behold, my sons are among you, again, they're not with me. I've chosen obedience to God over and above my children. And Samuel was raised in a way that this lesson was taught quite clearly. Because Samuel came from a line of individuals. I want to read you this genealogy because it's important. But he comes from a line that understood that obedience to God superseded any other thing. Look at this list of individuals that Samuel was a descendant of. 1 Chronicles chapter 6, verses 33 through 37. These are the men who served their sons. Of the sons of the Kohathites, Heman the singer, the son of Joel, son of Samuel, son of Elkanah, son of Jeroham, son of Eliel, son of Toa, son of Zuph, son of Elkanah, son of Mahath, son of Amasai, son of Elkanah, son of Joel, son of Azariah, son of Zephaniah, son of Tahath, son of Asur, son of Abiasaph, son of Korah. His name, that was a little bit of a tongue twister. I was kind of expecting an applause at the end, but it's too late now. Son of Korah. Anybody familiar with the name Korah? He's a figure that comes up in the Old Testament. And Samuel was a descendant of Korah. Korah's family was the ones that when God made this promise, this covenant, these people, they gave him an object. It was the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant was to follow the nation of Israel wherever they went. And what the Ark of the Covenant was essentially built for, and there's a lot of reasons it was built for, but one of the reasons it was built for was to remind the nation of Israel that when you live in obedience to God, God will be good to you. It was a reminder, it was a promise that live in obedience to me, Israel. And so this box had it would be in the temple, it would be in the place, the Holy of Holies, God's presence. And in this ark, it was obviously a very important object. And Korah's family was put in charge of transporting it. Wherever they went, Korah's family would transport this box, this covenant, this object. And one day, Korah looks at Moses and Aaron, the people that are leading Israel, and he becomes jealous. He becomes jealous of their leadership, and he begins to start leading a revolt against Moses and Aaron. Like who are they? I can lead just like they can. I want that position. And the story of Korah leading a revolt against Moses and Aaron is found in Numbers 16. And so if you've never read this story, it's wild. And I would encourage you to read that today or sometime this week. Numbers 16. It won't take long to read, but it's a powerful story. And so Korah's leading this rebellion, this revolt. And this is what I want us to look at verses 23 and 24 because Korah gathered this assembly against Moses and Aaron. But look at this. Verse 23. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying say to the congregation, get away from the dwelling of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. God says, enough is enough. Right? This revolt is beginning, but God begins to say, hey, Moses, Aaron, go start telling the people that's not the crowd you want to run with. That's not the crew that you want to get in with. Because guess what? They're living in rebellion to me. Because I've placed you guys. I've placed you guys in that position of leadership. And so to bring a charge against Moses and Aaron was making an accusation against God that God did something wrong in placing Moses and Aaron in their positions. And so God's saying, okay, you guys want to revolt against me? Moses and Aaron, tell the bystanders to get out of the way because my wrath is coming. Right? God is not going to deal with people revolting and rebelling against him. And just like in the way that Samuel had the people coming and saying, hey, we want a king, we want a king. God says to him, hey, listen, Samuel, they're not rebelling against you, they're rebelling against me. That's how God sees this moment. And so the warning, Yahweh says, separate from the wicked. And so Samuel here in our passage is demonstrating that same very thing. That there's wickedness going on in the nation of Israel. Samuel, you need to separate. Separate from the wicked, even if it means standing alone. Now, when God tells Moses and Aaron to give this message to the people that are following Korah to separate from the wicked, that doesn't mean we don't interact with the world. That doesn't mean we don't interact with sinful people. But it does mean that we don't share unity. We don't unify with the way of the world. And so God tells them to separate from Korah. Now check this out. Here's the judgment. And this is recorded in the Bible. Verse 31. And as soon as he finished speaking all these words, the ground under them split apart, and the earth opened its mouth. And I bet you didn't know that, but the earth has a mouth. And the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households and all the people who belonged to Korah and all their goods. Wow, that's kind of an interesting, I don't know if you're picturing the world swallowing people, but that happened. And the question I have, if you read this, is how is Samuel a descendant of Korah if Korah and his household, all those who belong to Korah and their households, got swallowed up by the earth? Could be an interesting question to wrestle with. How could that be possible? Well, the answer is in another genealogy. Numbers 26. The sons of Eliab, Nemuel, Dathan, and Abiram. These are Dathan and Abiram, chosen from the congregation, who contended against Moses and Aaron in the company of Korah. And when they contended against the Lord, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up together with Korah, when that company died, when the fire devoured 250 men, and they became a warning. Verse 11, but the sons of Korah did not die. The sons of Korah did not die. So if we take this knowledge and we go back to Numbers chapter 16 and we look at that story, right? Moses and Aaron, hey, go tell the people that, hey, if you're rolling with Korah, you might want to get away. You might want to separate. Well, guess who then had to have separated from Korah? His sons. Where essentially the sons of Korah look at dad and say, hey, dad, we love you, but we love God more, and you're living in rebellion to him, and we have to separate. We can't unify here, dad, because we're called to be obedient to God, and you're wicked right now. Right? You're rebelling against God, and we can't have unity here. And so Korah's sons separate. Dad, we love you, but we love God more. And again, this is Samuel's descendants. God was preeminent. If you're familiar with the Psalms, there are actually many Psalms written by the sons of Korah. And some really prominent ones that I'm sure you would recognize if shared. And so I want to just read one of them to you that I hope brings more context to this verse. For a day in your courts is better than 1,000 elsewhere. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of the wickedness. That was written by the sons of Korah. Can you imagine where they took that lesson? Can you imagine the heart that came from? That I would rather dwell one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of the wicked. You know what they're saying? There's no cost too great to following God. If I have to abandon everything else to be obedient to you, God, I'm willing to do it. My love for you precedes, it's preeminent, it's better, it's more than my love for my family. It's more than for your mom and dad. It's more than your spouse. It's more than your kids. And that can be so hard when all the earthly relationships that we know, we love, and they're good things, they're good relationships, they're good gifts of God, but they don't precede God. They're not preeminent over him. He demands our total highest allegiance. And if you're a parent in here, if you're a spouse in here, I loved when I got married, my wife and I did our own vows, and she said, I've been called to submit to you, and I'm going to do that so as long as you're following Christ. But if you were to veer off, I'm not going to follow. And that's the way it's supposed to be. That's the way it's supposed to be. Husbands, we don't get to lead our wives into sin. They're not called to follow that. I can give you a lot of biblical reasons if you need that later. But our relationship, our worship, our love for God must always be preeminent. And this isn't just an Old Testament thing. Look at what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 10, verse 37 to 39. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Jesus demands our highest allegiance. Does that mean it's wrong to love mom and dad? Wrong to love your spouse? Wrong to love your kids? No, none of that is wrong, but if you see the words Jesus uses, he says, if you love father, mother more than me. It's about a greater love. It's about greater affections. There's an order to which we love, and God has to be the highest, the point. Let's pick back up in verse 3. Here I am. Testify against me before the Lord and before his anointed. Whose ox have I taken, or whose donkey have I taken, or whom have I defrauded? Whom have I oppressed, or for whose hand have I taken a bribe to blind my eyes with it? Testify against me, and I'll restore it to you. They said, you have not defrauded us, or oppressed us, or taken anything from any man's hand. And he said to them, the Lord is witness against you, and his anointed is witness this day, that you have not found anything on my hand. And they said, he is witness. And so before Samuel officially hangs up the robe and says, hey, you know what? I served in this capacity, in this way. He says one last thing. He points to the reality. He says, hey, I want you all to remember this moment, this day, as to how you were being led. I want you to see how I led and how God had orchestrated this to all work. And I want you to remember how good it was when it was today. If things go bad, if things go sour, if things, because they're going to, I want you to remember this day before we officially transition to a new way of governance. Remember how I led amongst you. Did I steal from any of you? Did I take your belongings? Did I stick my hands into your savings account and just pull up stuff? Did I take a bribe? I close my eyes to justice? No, because I didn't pervert justice. I was true, honest, and right. I want you to remember the way you were treated when I was judge over Israel. Yeah, I'm old and gray. That's your excuse. I'm old. Okay, I'm old. But what have I done? Lay the charge before me. Congratulations, you have eyes. You can see that I'm old. And you may think for a moment, wait, is Samuel caring too much about what other people think about him? Because there's this weird idea that we're not supposed to care about what other people think about us. I don't think that's biblical. It's biblical in the way that you shouldn't care what other people think if you're pursuing Christ or holiness or righteousness. Okay, who cares what people think at that point? But we're ambassadors of Christ. We're to give a witness. We're supposed to live in such a way that people would see your good works, and that not only would they see them, but they would see the reflection of who you're reflecting with how you live. And so shouldn't we care about what people are seeing? I mean, what Paul says in Acts chapter 24, verse 16, he says, so I always take pains to have a clear conscience towards both God and man. I want to know that I'm living right before him, and I want to know that I'm living right before all you. That matters. Your testimony matters. Samuel here wanted to make sure the legacy he was leaving wasn't going to have an asterisk in it. It wasn't going to say, oh yeah, but he did this. Like, remember him for this. Remember him for the bad things that he did. No, he said, I want to live right before all of you. And so, hey, if there's anybody that could bring up a charge, I want to deal with that right now. Essentially, what Samuel did is, in his farewell, most of us are probably, my guess would be, relatively politically involved in way of watching news, watching. You care about anybody not care about who the president is? Right? Well, we care about who the president is. So much so, I'm sure many of you stayed up, in 2020 about who, the night of the election, and you wanted to see who was going to be the individual to come out victorious. We care about that kind of stuff. But my guess is the times in your life where you had a president that you really liked, that you believed did the economy good, it was essentially you were remembering things about what it was like when they were president. Right? Sometimes on social media you can see things like, hey, when so-and-so was president, this is what the taxes were. When so-and-so was president, this is what gas prices were. When so-and-so was president, this is what unemployment rates were at. And then we have all the data. Hey, there wasn't explosions. There wasn't cultural tension. There wasn't this. Right? When this person was president, throughout your history, I'm sure you have those people that you can think about. Hey, when they were in leadership, it was good. Essentially, Samuel's document this moment. This is what the taxes were. This is what unemployment was. Right? He's wanting you to have that image so you can remember when. Remember when. Remember when God's governance was the way that how Israel is being led. Remember when. And that's what the remainder of the chapter is. That's what Samuel does. He gives a history lesson for the next 17 verses. He says, hey, let me take you on a journey of our history. Remember when we were locked down in Egypt. Remember when God was faithful. Remember when he delivered us. Remember when our fathers rebelled. Remember when God was faithful. Over and over, he's just teaching, reminding them, remember when. Remember when. Remember when. Remember when. He delivered them. And there's moments that come in our lives when God is going to call you to stand in obedience to him, and that's not the popular decision. Remember when. We have millennia of history of God's faithfulness, and we can always look back to that. Remember when. Because when Jesus gives the cost of discipleship in Luke chapter 14, he says, and which one of you would not first consider if the army that's coming against you with 10,000 men, that if you would have enough to sustain it, to fight against it. Essentially, it's like, in that moment, when you're outnumbered, have you considered that? Have you considered what it's like when you are not the majority? When everyone else is thinking, yeah, Christianity, the sweet aroma and fragrance. No, when it's actually hostile to be a Christian. Have you considered that? And Jesus is going to just remind us in what we're seeing in our passage today. Remember when. So many moments of God's faithfulness, and he will come through. God will come through for you. Doesn't mean circumstances are always going to be easy, and it doesn't mean that obeying God is always going to be fun. But God's plans are always going to prevail. And so we've been called to live in that obedience, even if it means standing alone. Jesus is worth it. Jesus is worth it. If you don't know Jesus today, I want to invite you into that relationship. There's no greater relationship. And there's no victory outside of him. It would be better to live in obedience to God than be loved by the masses of sinful rebellion. And so Jesus affords this relationship to you today. That if you were to confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you would be saved. And so I don't know who here needs to make that decision today, but I encourage you to not leave without making that decision. There's no greater decision that you could ever make in your life. There's no greater love that you could experience than that of the Savior, Jesus. Let me pray for us.